everybody. What an incredible kickoff for Universe. In case you missed it, I'm April Leonard, Staff Software Engineering Manager. And technology moves fast. But working at GitHub, we build tools to help you move even faster. So today, I'm going to show you how to get coding faster with Codespaces. Terrible pun, I know. Couldn't help myself. But Codespaces solves problems that you don't realize you have. We don't think twice about checking out code, downloading dependencies, and then fighting with dependency conflicts, installing tools, and then debugging bad interactions with other tools, and then switching branches and the constant maintenance of our developer environments. The good news is that with Codespaces, you never have to worry about any of this ever again. Just select a repository and go. You get a clean, isolated, pre-configured environment with the power of config as code. So let's take a moment to talk about the evolution of software and how revolutionary this is. If we have a bug that we want to fix, like a change that we want to make, how do we get that into the hands of our users? Back in the 2000s, early 2000s, like the aughts, I don't know, it was a long time ago. I was an engineer on a team deploying an on-premise solution, which meant we packaged up our code, we pre-installed it on a tower, and we physically shipped it to the customer's business site. Time to confidence in my change was months. And then we pivoted to software as a service model, hosting our code in data centers, and responding to change was much faster at this point. And then with the rise of cloud-hosted services, we moved away from our data centers and we offloaded the maintenance burden of procuring hardware and patching servers to keep up with the latest security and firmware upgrades. One more step of simplification. And then Docker and Kubernetes came along to help us isolate and scale our applications, and this brought our developer environments one step closer to production. I might fix multiple bugs in a day. Each of these moments and technologies fundamentally shifted how developers work. And yet with all these improvements, we still struggle with works on my machine. When I started at GitHub 2 years ago, I struggled for days to get my environment set up with our 10-year-old Ruby monolith. To debug my issues, I needed to figure out what on my machine was different from the other 600 engineers who all had slightly different setups. I looked at what recent OS upgrades I might have done, what processes were running, and whether Docker was allocating enough memory. There were so many permutations of what could go wrong that I was ready to table flip. I'm supposed to know how to do this stuff, right? And then we adopted Codespaces, your developer environment in the cloud. Codespaces automates environment setup. It hands you a fully built and ready machine that is exactly the same every time in seconds. So instead of comparing production to each of those 600 engineers' machines, you only have to compare them to one at any point in your Git history. And it works on every machine, in every tool, and for everyone. Since we made Codespaces available to GitHub teams and enterprises last year, we're seeing users onboard their teams faster and improve their developer experience. But of course, this is GitHub, and we want to make this experience available to everyone. So in case you missed it this morning, I'm thrilled to announce again that Codespaces will be available over the next week for all GitHub users with up to 60 hours of free usage every month. So excited. So we don't want to focus on fighting with our developer environments. We want to focus on building what matters, but with your experience, your tools, wherever you are, with the best practices of config as code built in. So let's dive in. The first thing I'll show you is that you can create a code space from any repository. So for example, this is a little React project that I'm working on. From the code dropdown, usually I would clone locally. But instead, I can simply switch to the Codespaces tab. And by pressing this little plus button, I can create a Codespace. Now, I already have a Codespace running on this branch right here. But if I switch branches, let's go over here to main, and let's try implement checkout. There we go, back to the code dropdown. Then the Codespaces takes this into account. So really, I can have as many Codespaces on as many branches as I want, or really from anywhere in your Git history. You'll also find that Codespaces are now in the top navigation header. So we'll go ahead and click on that. And we land on the Codespaces dashboard. Here we have access to these quick start templates, a curated list of getting started experiences, and then a list of the Codespaces that you can sort by repository. So first, let's create a blank Codespace. When I click that button, a developer environment is spinning up in the cloud, pre-installed with an image that we call the universal image. It has a common set of tools and runtimes like Python, Node, Docker, and even ML libraries like Conda and PyTorch. We maintain the image so that you don't have to keep up on the latest tooling and security patches. Go ahead and zoom in here a little bit so you can see a little better. Resize this window. The best part about templates is I didn't fork a repo. So if we show the hidden files here in the root is what I meant to say, in the root directory. So I'm going to type in ls-la. It's going to show our hidden files as soon as we get connected here. So we'll make sure I'm hardwired in, which I am. We'll give this just a moment. There we are. All right, ls-la. And there you can see that you might recognize that there's no Git folder. The blank template doesn't even initialize Git. So it's a completely clean environment, just like local, that I can just like mess up and delete when I'm done. And Codespaces loads your experience. So our dotfiles are loading. I have my GitHub theme here, and my VS Code extensions are installing. So right here in the bottom right-hand corner, you should be able to see that I've got Copilot. So let's create a file called test.js, and I'm going to ask Copilot to create a nested loop, 3 levels deep. All right. I think Copilot's not actually installed. I'm just going to take a minute here. Copilot, where are you? Hey, Copilot. That's not working on my, I didn't actually get that started. All right. What? I will say I'm really confused, but that's okay. Sometimes this happens. That's what happens in live demos. That's how you know it's live. That's why I'm doing it like this, right? Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. OK, Copilot, you're with me. Are you with me, Copilot? A nested loop, 3 levels deep. And thank you. Thank you, Copilot. Much better. All right. Well, so you're going to laugh, right? Because the whole point I wanted to do that was so that I could show you that my indent rainbow extension is also loaded. Which I think it's not, but that's OK. And then lastly, what I can tell you is loaded is, you might notice here, is this like this beautiful JS? That's my material icon, or my material icon theme, which I just always like to have because it shows me all of my file types at a glance. So I showed you like the extensions that I love, right? You're going to have the extensions that you love. But Codespaces also loads my dotfiles. So my favorite tools are always with me. For example, I'll start a new actually, I can just leave this same terminal window. But I'm going to start a new session, a new tmux session called new, let's call it universe demo. All right. So there, I have my tmux session started, and I'm going to type in a new window, and let's start top over here. right? So like I can have top on one side, and I can have my favorite processes, my favorite windows, like my setup wherever I want. And so because this all loaded through my dot files, you can actually share productivity tips with anyone simply by sharing your dot files repository. And that's really powerful for teams, right? My experience, if you're pairing with somebody and they're like, oh, that's really cool, you can just be like, here it is. And your dot files are automatically loaded with Codespaces. Because as developers, we get very attached to our tools. And for every project, I have a slightly different setup. So often, it's VS Code in the browser. It's all I need. But let's take a look at our options, because Codespaces integrates with your favorite tools. So what we're going to do is we'll switch back to the Codespaces dashboard right over here. And we'll just refresh the page so that we can see that new blank template that we were just working on together. I go right over here to the triple dots in the bottom right-hand corner, press open in, and you can see here that we have VS Code in the browser. We have VS Code Desktop, and now we also have, in beta, JetBrains and Jupyter Lab. So if you're a Vim user, you can also connect to your Codespace directly from the GitHub CLI, like this. GHCS SSH. That stands for GitHub Codespaces SSH. And it just gives us an automatic list of all the Codespaces that we want. So let's go ahead and look at our automatic waffle here, which is the one that we just created together. And now we have a terminal attached to our Codespace. So from here, I can even view that tmux session that we just started by typing tmux attach session -t, and I think we called it universe demo. There you go. You know it's the exact same machine in the cloud. And the CLI is a powerful tool for managing your Codespaces. So I'll switch to a new session over here. And let's take a look at GHCS, which shows us all of the commands that we have available. So we can copy files between your local machine and your Codespace. We have CRUD operations. You can manage the visibility of your ports and even rebuild. The CLI provides you incredible access to your remote machine in the way that works for you, and the ability to automate common scripts and full access to the Codespaces API. So Codespace really meets you where you are, on any device with the browser, so I can switch seamlessly between my laptop and my tablet, depending on whether I'm working at home, heading to the coffee shop, or on my commute. All right, so next, we're going to spin up a little Next.js project together. I'm sure many of you have already done this before because Next is super cool. But if you haven't, traditionally, we would start with something like this, the docs. Now, it's a lot of steps that we're going to have to walk through. And even if you haven't looked at Next.js before, it's pretty much the same with any technology, right? There's a guide, there's a blog, or a README to get you started. But what if I told you there's a better way that automates these steps for you? Let's take a look at spinning up a Next repository the Codespaces way. So from your Codespaces dashboard, we'll go here and select the See All link. And we can see all these templates that we have available. So we'll simply select the Next.js template, and that's it. That's all the steps, and it just works. Behind the scenes, we're spinning up a remote environment. We're downloading the code from the backing repository, installing dependencies, running the application, and displaying the output. And we're connected to a Codespace now. npm run dev is running automatically, and the core files that drive this experience are opening too. So I don't know about you, but it might seem a little bit like magic, but it's just config as code right next to your project. The dev container JSON file is a document that defines how your project will build, display, and run. So let's take a look while the server is finishing running. I'll open the dev container folder here, and we'll bring up dev container JSON. Actually, I'll make this a little bit smaller, and this a little bigger. There you go. There you go. So what we do here is we specify the minimum host requirements, the build, the file that should open on launch, and which processes to start and which ports to forward. So every time that someone creates a Codespace from this repository, they get the same exact, delightful experience. I have the full power of VS Code in the browser with my terminal and my running application. And since index.js is the file that drives this experience, it's already open. I don't have to remember whether it's index.js or app.js or hashtag.js. I can just make a quick change. And here, let's call it, where is our fast? Let's call it universe. Universe demo, and how about getting us a nice emoji? And there it goes. I actually didn't even press save. And we see our change right away. So instead of sitting back and consuming information about how to explore new frameworks, I get to spend more time tinkering and playing with the code. You might have noticed that source control is tracking our changes. You can tell from the source control tab over here. That's right. So we have Git initialized, but we still didn't create a fork of this repository. It's not connected to a repo until we decide to turn this project into something more. So I can commit my change. Excellent, and yes, I do want to stage it. And I can create a repository. Let's make it public, and I'll call it my next idea. So now I can start building out my project with actions, dependabot, pull requests, and all the other tools that I need to start iterating. I didn't even have to break out of my coding flow, and now I'm ready to collaborate. I'm partnering with my friend Burke, who is a VS Code expert, here to show you a little bit more about the magic of Codespaces in VS Code. Hey Burke, I just pushed up this new repo called Next Idea. Let's jam on it.
How's it going? Thank you, April. Hey folks. My name is Burke, and I'm being asked to log into the VPN, and I'm just going to decline that right away. I work with the VS Code team at Microsoft, and yeah, let's jump right in here and get started. Now, the first thing we'll do is dismiss this window again, and then come up here and see about turning this off. Let's just disconnect. Perfect. Problem solved. Nope. OK. VPN or no VPN. Normally, what we'd have to do here is we'd have to come fork, right? And then we'd come over and click the code tab. We'd come over and we'd clone. We'd pull it down locally. We wouldn't read the README because we don't need that. We'd do some Googling. 30 minutes later, we'd give up and actually read the README, and then maybe we'd be up and running. But today, we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to click code, and then we're going to go to Codespaces, and we're going to create a code space right here in the browser. Now, I feel like in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you, I do work on the VS Code team at Microsoft, and so I'm a little biased. I love VS Code. I love VS Code. This is my VS Code. This is my local VS Code. You're looking at it here. This is my theme. It's called Cobalt 2. You're welcome to steal that, use it for yourself. It's a beautiful theme. I've got tons of icons here in my activity bar, including things I use a lot, like Docker and Azure. All my extensions are here. Even more disturbing, my sidebar is on the right. I mean, y'all, look, this thing's totally customized. I can order pizza directly from my VS Code, right? There's literally an extension for everything. That's the magic of VS Code. Now listen, this may seem strange to you, but for me, this is home. I'm comfortable here. And if there's one thing that we know on the VS Code team, it's that it's not our VS Code, it's your VS Code. It's what you do with it that makes it great. And having that familiar environment is like a warm blanket for your soul when you're jumping into a new project or code that you've never seen before. And with VS Code and Codespaces, you can take this experience, your experience with you, no matter where you are. So let me show you how. In VS Code, from the gear, we'll click on Turn On Settings Sync. And then from here, we have some options on what we want to turn on. Settings are things like your sidebar on the right, keyboard shortcuts, any shortcuts that you've defined, any user snippets that you've defined, or tasks for running projects. All of your extensions can be synced, and your UI state, which is things like your themes. So we'll just sign in with our GitHub account. And you'll see this happens pretty quickly, and our settings are now synced up to GitHub. Now, how does this actually work in the real world? Let's toggle back over to our browser, and here you see the same project that April had, but it's running for me with my settings, right? So this is my VS Code running here in a code space. My sidebar's on the right. I got my nice theme here. Again, that's Cobalt 2. I can't say that enough. It's a great theme. You should use it if you're not using it. It's awesome. Great ones out there. That's my fave. Now, another thing that we just added in VS Code is a secondary sidebar. Because you like the first sidebar so much, we added a second one for you. And so I actually toggle this with a custom keyboard command, and I like to put my find in the secondary sidebar, right? I want it to have a dedicated spot. And if you don't know this about Visual Studio Code, you can literally just take things and drag them around to where you want them to be and just drop them, okay? And everything in VS Code works this way. So for instance, if we're looking at the timeline in VS Code, it shows the history of the current file that we're in. And you may think to yourself, yeah, that's cool, but that would make more sense in the source control view. No problem, just pick it, drop it over here, right here on the source control view, and you can literally customize VS Code and make it exactly the way that you want it to be. Now, by default, we do a one-way sync for all of your settings when you turn setting sync on to your code space, even if you haven't turned it on in your code space. A one-time, one-way sync. If you want a true two-way sync, you can come and turn on setting sync here in the browser, the same way we did locally, and now any changes you make in the browser will be reflected everywhere else you have setting sync turned on. All right, now, I don't know anything about Next, but that's great. It appears I don't have to, it just kind of works. But I do know a little bit about React, so what I want to do here is just kind of jump in and make a change and see if we're going to start working on this project. So let's see, let's jump over to our index file here. And what I want to do is create, let's just add maybe an H2 here. So we'll just do an H2 and just say hello from VS Code. There we go. Oh, it failed to compile, did it? How about now? That's what I thought. All right. So hello from VS Code. Now, I would, this is great. I like this. But I'd love to change the color of the font. But I can't remember how to do that in React. I always forget this. Oh, this is embarrassing because it's a demo. But you know what? We do have full VS Code here, and that means that we can take advantage of things like Copilot. So maybe if we just ask Copilot for an H2 with inline style. Perfect, that's exactly what I wanted, yes, all right. So this is a red H2. It's an object, I always forget that. Copilot is great at helping you with the little things. So we'll just say hello from VS Code, all right. So now, you know what, I've decided, hey, I really like this, I want to work on this, I want to invest some time into this. We could do that right here in the browser. We could have 50 code spaces running at one time if that's what we wanted to do. But sometimes if you have a long-running work stream, right, you're going to invest in something long-term, you might want to bring that and work on it locally. And you can seamlessly move from the browser to your local VS Code from the menu by selecting Open in VS Code Desktop. This will reload our local VS Code and connect directly to that code space. Now, when this code space comes up, what you'll notice is that even though we're local, down here in the left-hand corner, if I can zoom in a bit, you can see we're actually connected to Codespaces. That's called the remote indicator, and that's how we know. If I toggle that sidebar, you can see we've got the sidebar here locally, and eventually all of this will sync because we turned on setting sync in the browser as well. We can also run this locally, just like we did in the browser. So if we go over to our ports, we can open up our application here in the browser. And if you notice here, we might still be, are we still firing up? Let's see here. Where's our terminal? Yeah, I think we're still compiling, but if you notice here, it's going to run it right here on this 127, so everything feels local, even though you're actually running in a code space. And that's the magic of working with code spaces. So now you have your own environment, the place where you feel comfortable, but all of this has happened in the span of a couple of minutes. In the real world, you might do this a lot, because Codespaces are super easy to spin up and then knock down. They can be very ephemeral environments. And so you can manage those from github.com, and you can do it directly from Visual Studio Code. So with the Codespaces extension here, I'm going to come over. We can see all of my Codespaces that I have created at the moment for all of the accounts that I've got. So here's the one we're working on. You can see it's green because it's actually running. And we can do things here like delete a Codespace. We can even add a Codespace from here. You can paste in the URL to a GitHub repo, or we could just go search GitHub right here from Visual Studio Code and create a new Codespace. Best of all, y'all, we can change the machine type. Look at this. We can get 32 cores and 64 gigs of RAM. Yes, you could literally upgrade your development environment with one click. That is the magic of Codespaces. All right, so let's connect back to this Codespace we were in. Now, we've talked a lot about customization and how important that is, and it is important for you as an individual, but it's also important for Codespaces itself. So when April was talking before, she mentioned this configuration as code, and that allows us to configure this environment, the VS Code environment, for anyone who creates a Codespace from this repository. So for instance, I have the ESLint extension. It's installed for me locally, but if I could put it in the Codespace, it would improve the experience for anybody who uses this project. And we can do that with a right click and then saying add to dev container JSON. Now when we do this, it will add the configuration to this file here. So let's take a look at that. And if you scroll down, you can see it's added this section here specifically for VS Code, and any extensions will be in that extensions array. Furthermore, we can specify any setting for VS Code here in this configuration file. For instance, if we figure everybody's sidebar needs to be on the right, we could do that. Don't do that. That's not very nice. Don't move people's sidebars, although I do it. Instead, what you should do is, it's really good for doing things like ESLint, certain properties of this extension. Always show status. Let's set this to true. That way everybody can always see the status of ESLint in their status bar, which will be nice. Now, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and check this back into April's repo so that she can get the benefits of the ESLint extension and the settings that we've added here. But if you remember, we never actually forked this repo, right? We just started coding. So how does this exist? If I commit code, where does it go? I don't know. Let's find out. So I'm going to come here to the source control. This was our change that we made. We'll go ahead and get rid of this. And let's go ahead and commit this dev container file. And we'll just say add ESLint config and commit. Now, we've committed this file. We're ready to sync it. Sync it to what? Well, because it's Visual Studio Code and Codespaces, we take care of this for you. So if we look back at our terminal here and we do a git remote, you'll see that that's not a valid command. Oh, by the way, you see that little light bulb right there? Look at this. We actually fix, if you click on it, it says, did you mean to run git remote-v? Why, yes, I did. Thank you very much, Visual Studio Code. OK, so there we have an origin has been set for us and the upstream, right? This has all been configured for me. I didn't have to do any of this. So now, let's go ahead and push. And what I want to do is I want to create a pull request. So normally, we might jump out and go to github.com and do that. We could still do that. But with the GitHub issues and pull request extension right here in the sidebar, which is included in the Codespace, we can create a pull request right here from Visual Studio Code. So right here from the sidebar, we should be able to create a pull request directly against, you know what we should do though, probably, what would be better is if we created a feature branch. There we go. Update, config. All right, and then maybe we will publish this branch and to the origin, and we'll submit a PR on that one instead. All right, so I managed to get my Git in a state where I can't push the branch or create the PR, but you can create PRs directly from Visual Studio Code, excuse me, right here with the GitHub issues, pull request and issues extension, even manage them from Visual Studio Code. bringing everything into the inner loop, into the place where you feel comfortable. So that's Visual Studio Code and Codespaces. It's your VS Code. Take it with you no matter where you are or where you're working. Happy coding. April?
Thanks, Burke. I'm so excited to learn how your changes are going to make me more productive. So speaking of learning, there are tons of ways to learn and explore new languages and frameworks, and I'm excited to share with you today that LinkedIn Learning has over 50 courses integrated with Codespaces. They cover 6 of the most popular programming languages, as well as topics like data science, AI, machine learning. These courses will be unlocked on LinkedIn Learning for free through February 2023, so definitely go and check it out. I know I'm going to. But I want to tell you about a little bit earlier in my career when I was also still learning how to code. I had my own office. This is a long time ago. I would spend most of my day coding without interruption, right? I'd close my door. But today, I don't close my door on my teammates. We work together. Like Burke and I were just collaborating and learning from each other. And that's why it's not just about building what matters, but doing it together. And Codespaces makes it really easy to collaborate, whether you're working in real time, working asynchronously, or with a larger open source community. So let me show you. We're going to head back over to our next idea. And sometimes I have someone like Burke who I'm pairing on the code with, but other times I just want to show off my work to my product manager or designer. Now, Codespaces are secure by default, which means they're private. So let's go over here to the Ports tab, and we can see here our visibility is private. But I'm going to go ahead and right-click, go to my port visibility, and I can actually make this public or private just to my organization. So I click this. I'm making this port private, and I can go to this preview, and now I can actually share this link with anybody. And I mean, you could actually go to this link right now, and you can share your work as it's in progress and have somebody execute that running application and give you feedback right there. Another way that I can real-time collaborate is with the live share extension. So back here in our code, I can go to live share. And I can now share in real time. I can invite people to collaborate directly on this code space with me, live. Or we can invite a bunch of people and start a party programming session. I don't know if party programming is a thing, but you heard it today. So once my project gets a little bigger, I'm going to start getting more collaborators, right? I'm going to want to start managing managing my changes with pull requests. And since the GitHub CLI is automatically installed in the universal image, I can create a PR directly from the command line, so I don't even have to break my coding flow. We'll go to the terminal window, start a new terminal window, thank you, and GHPR, and there it is. I can just create, do anything I want to right here with PRs. So sometimes I think about Codespaces like Git Stash, but it's for my entire laptop. So we're going to go ahead and stash our project next idea because I want to show you really quickly what it's like when I collaborate with my team at GitHub and how Codespaces integrates into my workflows. So this is a map of my team. We are split across time zones. So real-time communication isn't always possible. We rely heavily on asynchronous collaboration, which we do through pull requests. In fact, right now, let's go ahead and take a look at a pull request for my team, one of my team members, Emerald. So back here at my demo. Now, I don't want Emerald to get blocked with getting these improvements in, but when I'm in the flow, it can be really hard to switch contexts. So instead of when I'm working locally, stashing my changes, switching branches, maybe rebuilding, I simply go to any pull request, like this one from Emerald. I select the code dropdown right here, and I create a code space from her last commit. This is another one of those friction points that I didn't realize that I had until Codespaces handed me a completely isolated and pre-built environment at exactly the right point in Git history, so I can switch contexts more easily. But there's another place that I'm contributing to PRs, another place where we build together, and that's the open source community. Codespaces is a game changer for open source, for maintainers and contributors alike. So this demo that I just showed you is incredible for keeping maintainers productive and reviewing PRs. You can spin up as many laptops in the cloud as PRs to review, making it easier to juggle and manage all the incoming requests. And once that PR is merged, delete the code space. And if you're a contributor, think about this. Every project has a slightly different structure and tool set. And oftentimes they're complex, and you have limited time to contribute. So let's take a look at an open source project and really dig into that complexity. All right, Codespaces manages complexity so that you don't get stuck halfway through configuring your environment. With support for complex project types, powerful machines, easy configuration, and fast, continuous rebuilds, there's a rich and powerful tool set for maintainers and contributors to make the community better for everyone. All right, so we're going to check it out here with a repository called QuestDB. It's an open source project, a high throughput time series database that I've been tracking because I'm a total data nerd. And I've been working on this code space from a fork of this project on a new branch called Bootstrap Codespaces. I've added a dev container JSON file. And this is a Java project, by the way. So if we scroll down here, you can see it's like 88% Java. And I was a Java developer in my past life, and my primary IDE was IntelliJ. So when I'm coding in Java, it's my preferred tool. I can come up here to the code dropdown. I can select Open In, and let's select the JetBrains Gateway. Excellent. So you figured out exactly which code space I want to create. And I just want you to call out here that we also have access to RubyMine, PyCharm, PHP, WebStorm, and Golang. So I'll leave IntelliJ connected, and we'll jump right in. So I get the power of Codespace of IntelliJ without even having to install the IDE or Java on my machine. That's right. In all my developer tools, except for a thin client, are located in a secure and isolated remote environment, so I don't ever have to worry about Java conflicts ever again. So in our IntelliJ run configurations, they're already loaded, so we can simply come up here and run the server. Now, with this, what this will do is it's going to spin up a web console so that we can interact with our database. It's right over here. Localhost 98,000, but as you know, this is actually running in the cloud. So this is our beautiful web console. It's like one of my favorite things about QuestDB. It's really, really nice to use. And I'm going to go ahead and I've got some pre-seeded data here. I'm going to run, and awesome, there's our data. So in a few seconds, we're up and running and exploring this project. Now, one of the things that I tend to do when jumping into a new open source project to contribute is figuring out what the critical paths are and how the project is formed. Now, a powerful way to do this is finding a test and that does something important and then add a breakpoint, and you can just trace through the stack. So let's do that together. Now, if we come back here to the test that I picked out, which is the SQL compiler test, I'm guessing, just taking a guess, that my class under test here is SQL compiler. So let's go ahead and search for that. And there it is. So it looks like, yeah, we've definitely got, we're constructing a new SQL compiler right here. So let's go to the top of this test. And I put a breakpoint already here in our SQL compiler. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and right-click, and let's debug this test. This is what I love about Codespaces. Did it go? Yes. Nice. OK, so I am terrible about reading code. I am an active learner. I want to play with the technologies, not just read about them. So I've hit my breakpoint. I can start investigating the stack trace and build a mental map from the connections, right? I'm ready to jump into a good first issue. So let's think about that, right? We went directly from starting our environment, we found a test, and we're just up and running. Now, QuestDB runs in a single Docker container, but what about mono repos and microservices? Codespaces supports these too. So here, I'll show you back at our QuestDB repository. So from here, QuestDB, we're going to spend most of the rest of our time in this code dropdown in these three little dots right here. And now what we can do is create a code space, but with options. So from here, you can see that we have multiple dev containers to work with. So if you're working on a mono repo, you can define multiple dev containers in the same repository so each collaborator can work on a code space tailored to their needs. Now, if you remember, I seeded the Quest database with some data. And so if you had different teams working on the same code base and they had different data needs that they're working on, all you need to do is create a new, so they're working on different components of the system. All you need to do is create a new dev container. And you have access right here to a different, kind of like a profile. It's like a different profile. So you have just like a different profile in your system. But what if I have microservices that contain dependencies across multiple repositories? You can configure your dev container to pull in those code bases as well, leveraging GitHub authentication to ensure secure access. So GitHub has, or Codespaces has all these complex cases covered. And let's take a look at our machine type here. We have access to 4, 8, 16, 32 cores, and also in private beta, 6 cores as well. Super powerful machines. You'll notice here, 2 cores aren't available because I set the minimum requirements in the dev container to 4 cores because I just want to make sure that everybody who's spinning this up has a really great experience. All right. So now, we talked a little bit about these multiple dev containers. I actually want to show you just how easy it is to configure a dev container. So we're going to come back here in our code dropdown to these 3 little dots, and we'll configure a dev container. Dev containers are truly powerful, but they're also super easy to configure. So from our repository, here we go, you can see this is the dev container that I was already working on for this project. Let's say, like if I just kind of start typing some important information here, you're going to see some squiggles. That's because we go ahead and we're making sure that we're parsing this file. But what I really want to show you, and I want to draw your attention to, is this features section. Features are reusable configurations, kind of like building blocks that help you configure your environment with common frameworks, language support, and tools. So for an example, right here you can see that this is SSH is what we're loading in here. So if we type SSH, you can see that this is an SSH server, which allows remote connections from the terminal. And it's created by the dev container core team, and it has the blue check mark so that we know it's been verified. Now I have the documentation in line right here. If we click on that, right here. So I can just copy it right over. And we already have this one access, but yep, copy right over, and there it is. And I can build my dev container in this way. Now, we also, if we go back here, we can see that we could bring in Java, we can bring in Node, Python, and for each of these images, it has tons of versions, right? So this is really powerful. You don't have to have your own image. You can take advantage of the pre-configured images and tools that you need, and the dev containers team will handle all of the versions for you and all of those tools. So I can build out my dev container. I can also do this, pro tip, in VS Code and rebuild right in line and iterate on my environment. All right, so the last thing that I want to show you is, actually we'll go ahead and cancel out these changes. The last thing that I want to show you is, where do we go? There, code dropdown. There we go. From these 3 dots is setting up pre-builds. Pre-builds give you the ability to run Codespaces incredibly quickly. It's like continuous integration for your developer environment. And it's all powered by actions. So depending on the size and complexity of your project, it might take a few minutes, but maybe much longer to create your environment. So we can create as many configurations as we like, so let's take a look at one of them. So for each configuration, you can tie it to a branch, and you can create as many as you want here. You can also set the triggers that you need on every push, on every configuration change, and you can really configure it for your needs based on the regions that you want or the number of templates that you want to maintain. And so if we click in to see the output of one of our configurations, you can see that this is actually powered by actions. It's right here in the tab. So you can click in and debug on any configuration and make sure that it's successful, or debug it if it's not. In the last 7 days, over 600 branches, the average time saved pre-building was about 10 minutes. That's 10 minutes for every developer who didn't have to pull, build, and run. We just let computers do what they're good at, automating away our toil. So now you know a little bit more about the types of problems that Codespaces can solve for you, the keystrokes that you can save, and how to get in the flow and stay there. We've been really productive today. Nice work, y'all. We certainly got coding fast. We did a bit of prototyping, we started a PR review, we spun up a complex OSS project to contribute back to the community, all in our spare time. Codespaces has fundamentally changed my workflow for the better. You know that feeling of getting a new laptop and being simultaneously excited for a clean slate and annoyed by the thought of setting it up? We get the best of both worlds. Every time you start a Codespace, it's new and fresh and clean. Yet you have just what you need to get productive quickly and focus on the most important of your part of your job, building awesome projects. So whether you're working on a side project, starting something new, or working on a complex application for work or open source, try Codespaces out and get coding faster. Thank you.